So the downside is we didn't make it to a Waffle House for breakfast. The upside is we missed being in a snowstorm. Well, we made it home, pulling into the garage at 1 a.m., about 41 hours after leaving Orlando. The idea had been to do a leisurely return trip, stopping and doing some sightseeing along the way. I decided to scrap that plan and just do as straight a shot as we could. I didn't want to be at my most tired and trying to drive through a snowstorm. And I think that was a good decision because we got here with clear roads. And by the time I woke up Sunday morning, we had 6 inches of snow on the ground, and it was probably worse in southern Minnesota. We got a very tired Joan to bed in about 15 minutes. She was very excited about being home, but still, once her head hit the pillow, she went down like a rock. I was able to unpack the essentials from the car and get showered and be in bed by 2 a.m. The car is still in shambles though, so I'm gonna clean that up, shave and clean myself up, and then come back with some final thoughts. It's been a couple weeks now, and I've had a chance to edit the other segments and really reflect on the trip. And as I did so, I came up with some big takeaways for me, and then some suggestions that I'd like to pass on for you if you're going to take an EV road trip, especially with children. So here goes. First was starting with the clean car. Prepped and specifically organized for our trip, it really helped contain the mess and the chaos that inevitably happens on a road trip of this length. When I initially cut the foam and laid out our bedding area, I was concerned about squeaking noise, and really once we had it weighted down, it wasn't an issue at all. Even sleeping on it, rolling over, it made very minimal noise, so that turned out to be a non-issue, which was great. That impromptu footstool I built was a game changer, and it's still in the car weeks later. It really gave her more independent mobility to get in and out of her chair when we were at stops. And I think it was probably a good rest for her legs. So for the time being, that's staying in the car. Overall, the whole trip was colder than I expected and planned for. So it just meant we spent a few extra minutes at each charging stop to make sure we had enough to get from stop to stop. I was also surprised at how far south the cold stretched. Really, we were well into Texas before it was comfortable to be without a jacket. And then coming back, by the time we got to Atlanta, it was in the 30s, so much more brisk than I expected for the bulk of the trip. The Minnesota Tesla Owners Group has been really good with partnering with local businesses that have the Supercharger locations and making sure that there's a spot for garbage near the Superchargers, and a lot of times they install the garbage bins that have the windshield washer fluid built into it and the squeegee. It's a great benefit to travelers, and it would be cool if it was more prevalent nationwide. Now, I think some of these are maintained by the business, some by nearby Tesla owners, but if you stop by one and see that the washer fluid is low, go in and buy a gallon, top it up, and get it ready for the next traveler. Maybe the best news of the trip is that in Perry, Oklahoma, we were not eaten by raccoons. But we did have to fine-tune our sleeping arrangement. The original plan, as I described in the first video, was both of us heads toward the front of the car. Joan would be in her little space and I'd have the longer space. When we got to Perry, Joan had a different plan. So we ended up more like this. Okay, in reality it was more like this. So I knew we had to change plans for the overnight on the way home. This is what we came up with, and it worked pretty well. Even with the cold and lack of sleep, it's really amazing to travel across the country and see beautiful sunrises and sunsets, and that's one of my favorite things about road tripping, and something I'll always appreciate. Especially after you've been driving all night, seeing that sun come up is really refreshing. An unusual situation in the Midwest so far is having to wait for superchargers. But as we were all converging around Austin, both the Waco Supercharger and the Austin Supercharger had people waiting. And then after Fully Charged Live, the next superchargers around it were also fairly crowded. Adding more and more chargers will help with this. Once we got to Austin and Fully Charged Live, we had a great time, but it would have been nice to be able to sit in some of the sessions or go on some of the test rides. It was kind of the limiting factor with having Joan with me, but we got to see a lot of great stuff and look at things in a lot of detail. And now a lot of those sessions are available online, either through the individual presenter's YouTube channel or Fully Charged Live is posting one about every week of the different talks and sessions. So a lot of that content can be found on YouTube now. And another exciting growth area that was kind of focused on at Fully Charged Live was the EV conversions, and I spent a lot of time on that as well. But since that event, Tesla has now rolled out Track Mode version 2, where you get a lot more control out of how your front wheel drive, how your rear wheel drive, your level of regen, and your level of traction control. So it'll be interesting to see in the next year how the space evolves with people really starting to tune their EVs exactly how they like to drive. And hopefully that'll be a good conversion for people who like to be more hands-on with their cars to give an EV experience a chance. Another tip when traveling is use the restroom if there's one available. Some of those stops at night, there was just nothing around that was open. And if we forgot to stop somewhere before we hit a charger, we were out of luck. So just keep in mind to make use of what's available before you leave your current charger. Somebody asked me about our chat with the sheriff in Defuniak Springs, Florida, and that was all amicable. I cut it out to save time in the video, but he was really curious about EVs. He'd seen people supercharging but never really talked to anybody. So we had a really good talk about Tesla and kind of how this whole ecosystem works. So he was really receptive, really curious, and it was a great conversation. I'd like to apologize if the country music in this series was a little too intense. I was sticking with the theme, but as I watched all the episodes back to back to make notes for this, it's a little overpowering at times. Now another tip is about how we prep Joan for a trip of this size. It was going to be tons of time in the car, and so about 2 weeks before the trip, we'd be, finishing up dinner, and I'd say something like, "Joan, do you know what we're doing on our trip?" And I'd say, "Well, we're going to drive and drive and drive and drive, and then we're going to stop and get a snack, and then we're going to drive and drive and drive and drive. Then we're going to stop and eat some lunch, and then we're going to drive and drive and drive and drive." Anyway, like that. And eventually get to the point of, and then we're going to go see a car show. Continue, and then we're going to go see Disney World. And that, of course, got her really excited. We turned it into a game, with the repetition being the funny part is, you drive and drive and drive and drive, and then whatever. Did that several times over the couple weeks leading up to the trip. But the upside of that is it kind of set her expectations that there's going to be a lot of driving involved. But it also made it so that as she was getting crabby in the car, I could say, "Oh, Joan, do you know what part we're on right now? We're at the part where we drive and drive and drive and drive. And next we're gonna..." And then I'd kind of continue that, and, having that be a standing joke already kind of helped diffuse some of the tension if she would get a little squirrely on the road. We could just do that for a little bit, and it kind of reset her expectations of, oh yeah, we're in the process of doing something fun. Because I was so focused on the road trip parts of the trip, my wife booked the hotel in Orlando and all the Disney stuff, which was great because I didn't have to worry about it. But I didn't think to ask if the hotel had chargers. So it was a welcome surprise that they did have a charge point station with 2 connectors. The service was free through the hotel, and it wasn't a hassle because I already had the ChargePoint app on my phone. You did need the app to initialize the charge, but then there was no fee. Now, one thing I didn't focus much on in this trip is the data. I did show it, and hopefully that was enough for people who are really interested in that. But for me, it's more of a big picture thing of, is the performance matching my expectations? Is it cold and windy, and is that affecting my range? Am I going to need to slow down a little bit or charge a little longer? But other than that, I don't focus on every little kilowatt. As more and more chargers roll out, the differences between an internal combustion road trip and an EV road trip, those differences are beginning to shrink. When fast chargers and EVs are ubiquitous, I'm guessing most people won't pay that close of attention to what their watt hours per mile is, at least not on every trip. In my case, I think more about the adventure of the trip, the handling of the car, and the comfort of the ride for me and my tiny passenger. Still, I do want to recognize a couple data points. We did cross the 100,000 mile mark, and the car performs as good or better than when we bought it with 54,000 miles on it. We used over a megawatt of energy, roughly 60 diapers, over 10 days to travel 4,121 miles. But it wasn't just the miles, it was the adventure. To explain why I'd do this, I want to close out with another section I recorded down at Disney World. But before I do that, I want to thank you for watching this series. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post those down below and I'll do my best to answer them. So now, let's hand it off to Past Brian. A comment I got on one of my videos was that it seems like for Tesla owners, road tripping is a moral imperative. And I'm not sure if it's quite that, but I think what it is that we all had this vision of the future. We were shown this vision from movies to Tomorrowland to Walt Disney and all sorts of imaginative things that came out before us. And then we were brought up thinking this was just going to happen. And so I think when we see that there's an electric vehicle that you can actually drive on long road trips, it doesn't seem like it's really possible because it's taken so long. So I think it's more of we just have to prove it to ourselves because it seems too good to be true. Now we've done a lot of road trips and it's not quite perfect yet, but it's fantastic and it's so much cleaner and more efficient. But regardless, this is my inspiration for the world of tomorrow and why I'm so excited about EVs and the future of technology that's coming out. So I hope you get a sense of what it's like from our road trips, but I'd encourage you to get an electric vehicle of your own, even if it's just a rental. Try it out, see what you think. Even just go for a test drive, just out of curiosity. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them. But I'm not an expert, I'm just a guy who drives it and loves it. That's all, and I'll see you in our world of tomorrow. Hopefully by the time she's old enough to appreciate it, we'll be there.